Hey everybody, welcome to episode 4 of the Team Talley podcast, Parental Pilgrimage Group, Parental Pilgrimage with the Micro Preemie. Clearly I'm exhausted. Mike Kirkland here, Stephanie Kirkland here.
Hey everybody.
So it's been a pretty busy week around the Kirkland house the past couple of weeks. We're working on walking right now, which is great fun. I thought today, though, we could talk about uh, the period right after we got to the NICU. I thought we could talk about the Tally had brain bleeds that the likely explanation is started pretty soon after she was born. Hearing them say that was probably the scariest thing I'd ever heard in my entire life, up to that point, anyway. What did they say? It was level 4. Is that how they put it?
Um, so going into the NICU, the first 72 hours are the most critical hours for what they call IVH. Um, and that is the bleeding of the brain. The blood vessels will erupt, and then they will grade the size of the bleeds by the severity of them and how big they are. They don't really know how IVH happens or how to prevent it from happening. There's nothing they can do, but the explanation we've got is that the severe prematurity of her and the tinniness of her, obviously the blood vessels in your brain were not fully, um, I just lost the word. They weren't fully formed at the time of her birth, and they said it could be anything from any type of trauma during childbirth or even the smallest things of lifting her legs up too high to change her diaper, or the vessels were just so paper thin that at any time they could just erupt. So the first 72 hours, she had a incubator that said IVH cautions. And anytime we were in there to change the diapers or bathe her, they watching us, and we had to be extremely careful to touch her because of these things. So Talia was born May 12th. I remember May 15th, which is my husband Mike's birthday. I was still in the hospital, and Mike had come home to be with the kids that night. And I walk into her room, and they had done the first, sorry, they had done the first MRI of her head to find that she had grade 4 bilateral IVH, which is the biggest, worst, severe size that you can have. So at that point, I'm there by myself because Mike had gone home with the kids, and I had to call him and tell him over the phone that he needed to get to the hospital and what was going on. And we had to learn from there because the only thing I knew about brain bleeds leading into that was when my best friend had had a major stroke and had a brain bleed and passed from it. So my brain automatically went to, oh my God, she's not going to make it. But we did learn that when they're born that early, that the vessels in the brain is not fully developed, so that there is room for the bleeds inside of your brain when that happens, and it's not immediately death like it was for my adult friend. We were told that whatever brain damage she was going to have has already happened. There's no reversing it. Um, and we were told that on top of her prematurity delays, to expect even more delays with the brain bleeds because of the possible brain damage that she could have. So when Mike, I don't know if you want to when you got to the hospital, kind of tell them how the doctor sat down and explained things for you about this.
Well, I wasn't exactly sure what they were trying to tell us. I understand bleeding into the brain. I get that. But I was like, so, but what does that mean? So I understand there's so much space in there for the brain, and there's cranial fluid that's in there on its own as well. And I understand her bleeding increases the pressure because it's adding to the fluid. But I couldn't get my head around the idea of brain damage because they said she could, but they also, the way they explained it, said that her brain was still developing. It didn't have all the folds, how your brain looks wrinkly as an adult brain. She didn't have those yet because her brain was not that developed. So the way it was basically explained, and it took some arm twisting to get an explanation that we could wrap our heads around. Because she was still doing that development, she could still generate the pathways that she needed to do her development, to build her muscle, to walk, to talk, to all do all that stuff. So I feel like they were pretty positive from the beginning with, if she's going to keep bleeding, we'll deal with that. But, I don't feel like it was ever, oh, she's doomed because
I mean, I felt like it was a 50-50 shot. I didn't feel like it was ever rainbows and butterflies around the brain bleeds.
no, it was kind of a, if she does the work, then she can overcome it. It was never that it would be easy, but it was always, it's very possible. We can't guarantee anything, but she can do the work and overcome, maybe not 100%, but to some degree anyway, she could overcome it and improve and do better. That's all, even assuming the bleeding stops, which unfortunately they can't do anything about that, which to me was pretty shocking too. You always hear, oh, it's just too much Grey's Anatomy, I guess. They're like, oh, let's get an experimental surgery in here and open the baby's brain up and, you know what I mean? No, it's not like that. So much of this, especially, was we just have to wait and see what's going to happen. So they were doing a new MRI, they were checking the size of her head, and just watching the pressure build up, really. Waiting to see if it stopped, waiting to see if it slowed down, waiting to see if any of the excess drained out.
So a lot of babies that have IVH, grade 1 or grade 2, they have the majority of the times they will correct themselves. The bleeding will reabsorb into their brains. Their heads won't get larger than normal. Their soft spots won't bulge, and their uh what they when they would check to make sure
Just
the closing of the brain, the soft spot was going in the correct direction and wasn't coming further apart. So the brain bleeds are by far the hardest part for me and the hardest to talk about because they have the biggest impact on her development and any long-term challenges she's going to have. So, or not have. But every week, the first week or so, they did them every 2 or 3 days to check the size of the bleeds to see if it had stopped. And then they would come in every week after that and check her brains. And they would just do a top MRI to check the size of the bleeds and to see if they were getting bigger or smaller. So every Monday, it would be a long Monday waiting for the MRI results to see if they were correcting themselves, if they were getting bigger, if they were staying the same. And unfortunately, our girl never really had any days where we got the message or the news that they were correcting on their own or they were getting smaller. Um, they just kept pretty much staying the same size, which I was a positive. They weren't getting bigger, but they were already the biggest they could probably be. And we got a lot of reassurance from one of our favorite nurses saying that even though the MRI says it's a grade 4, she wasn't necessarily acting like babies with a grade 4. She was still able to suck a pacifier or just I think the biggest thing was a pacifier when she got to try to actually suck it that she could suck. But that was a really good sign for her. And even when the Dr. Doom was it her nickname told us about the results, she honestly I think was shocked about the severity of her brain bleeds because she wasn't showing any symptoms outwardly that she had these bleeds. So, about 4 weeks in, after getting these MRIs at least weekly, we were referred to the neuro team because her soft spot did start to have the bulge to it and her fontanelles were starting to come apart and not go together, which were signs that there was pressure on the brain. And so our favorite neurosurgeon, Dr. Of course I forgot her name. Just said she's my favorite and I forgot. Dr. G came in and it was like I want to say a Monday or a Tuesday and evaluated her. And at 1 month old, Tally had our first surgery. So they had went in with what they call a reservoir, which is they still say it's like a reservoir shunt, but it's not a shunt because it's a plastic disc that they inserted into the top of her skull where they could go in and drain fluid off of her brain to relieve the pressure from her brain. So the initial plan was that she would get the first tap in surgery, and then she would get it for 7 days after. And the neurosurgeon and her team would come around once a day, and they would take these needles. And they even did it one time when I was holding her. It's amazing because the babies don't cry when they do this. Like when you're getting a shot, they don't switch. Like I just held her, and they took this big needle, put it into her skull, and got however much fluid they needed to off of her brain for that day. So, after the 7 days of doing that, I really feel like this was a turning point for our girl to get that pressure off of her brain because after that she was extubated. She before that had pulled the tubes out herself and still couldn't function without the tubing, so they had to intubate her again. Um, so they were able to extubate her. She really started putting on her weight after that. And we only had to have the 7 days worth of tapping. They had told us that they would do the 7 days and they would still come in and measure her head and take the measurements and feel her soft spot and feel the fontanelles and see, make sure she didn't have any more signs of pressure on her brain. And if they did, that they would tap it as needed. And if it didn't continue to get better by the time we would leave, we would have another surgery and she would have the shunt that most people have now that drains the fluid off their brain into their stomach, and it would do that for the rest of her life. So, again, by the grace of God and our prayers and the strength of our Tally girl, we have not had to have another tap since then. And we see when we were in the NICU, they were still doing MRIs like every Monday to check it. And then when we went home, we went in when we got home from the NICU I once right away, and then we got pushed out to 3 months. And then after our 3 month appointment, they were going to push us out to 6 months. But then we got some news that was bad to us at the time They said that her head was growing fast again, and that her MRI had shown that the spaces were getting bigger. So instead of us going back in 6 months, we had to come back in another 3 months. And in between those 3 months, you're fretting and stressing and concerned about what's going on in your daughter's head. And of course, they give you symptoms. Do you remember what the symptoms are to look for in case there could be pressure on the brain?
Um, I knew one of them was a lot of fussy crying,
Yeah.
just general discomfort type of symptoms.
Basically, if she's just crying and you can't console her, and she's fed, she's dry, she's had a binky, she's rested, or if she was spitting up every time she ate, um, and then obviously if we could feel the top of her head and there was any bulging, any if her eyes started to kind of bulge, um, those were signs that we would have to go back to the straight back to the neurosurgeon. So myself as a mom, anytime she's fussy for any reason, I always went straight to the, oh, it's her head. But thankfully it wasn't, and we went back in another 3 months and everything had stayed the same, which is what the neurosurgeon said we wanted. She said basically that the spaces getting bigger could have been like some of the old blood kind of breaking off and going into those spaces, which makes it get bigger because if her body's not absorbing that blood, it has to go somewhere. And then eventually we got pushed back to 6 months, and we just went in this past August for another MRI, and everything is the same, which is what we want. The doctor at that time said that she had no symptoms of any terrible milestone delinquents. A lot of babies with brain bleeds could also have any type of variations of cerebral palsy. They could have just any type of traumatic brain injury, can have any type of major delays or hindrances for anybody, adult or baby.
Which they wouldn't even make a diagnosis like that until she was 2 anyway.
Right.
So they'll still look at her when she turns 2 and say, based on what progress she's making and what her condition is at the time, okay, we're going to work with the diagnosis of this condition or that or whatever it is. So in a lot of ways, we're still consistently in a wait and see type of situation. Now, it didn't help matters any that she comes from a large headed family either. Because, like, her pediatrician, Dr. Dean, she was like, well, her head's getting pretty big. Are you guys going to go see the neurosurgeon anytime soon? And we're like, yeah, we're going in a few weeks. It's just like, oh, okay, that's good. And it's like, why'd you have to say that? Don't say that.
Um, One of the things that is helpful, and if you guys have a child that is early or has any type of brain bleeds due to any other reason, is um, therapies, early prevention. Tally has, since we've come home, had physical therapy every Monday until recently. We've gone to every other Monday. And then she also was on the wait list for a while for occupational therapy, and we finally got into an occupational therapist a couple months ago to where she goes to occupational therapy and then physical therapy every Monday. And I think I found that soon as you start to get like to the point where you're like, we're sailing, everything is going great, something always gets back to you. It brings you back on your toes. So we were told early on with the physical therapist that the brain bleeds for babies are almost like a stroke for an adult. Sometimes it'll affect one side of your body, sometimes it'll affect both sides of your body, and a lot of times it has impacts on your muscles. So when Tally was little and we were going to physical therapy, she had tightness on her right side. And we had worked through all of that. We got her where she needed to be. She started crawling at one, which that's at one actual, not adjusted. So we were pretty happy with that. She was almost right on track with what her brother was, and he was a full-term baby. That point, the physical therapist did say she was getting a little bit on the behind track, not severely behind, but they wanted to see her get a little bit further along in her milestones. And then, um, I think it was back in July or August, our therapist quit to go pursue her master's degree
Yeah, that
in
was August.
therapy. So we have got a new physical therapist, which we've only got to see one time since then because of scheduling conflicts and the holiday and just a lot of things that went into play. I think they had a trouble finding someone to take over her patients when our therapist left, so we had a week there when we didn't get to see anyone. So she has said that because Tally, she took a little bit to want to pull up, and she took a little bit to want to put any weight on her feet. Um, I remember even when our son was one, he would at least just even stand unassisted. He definitely wasn't walking at one, but he would stand, and she's still not quite there. She's pulling up on things and standing while holding on, but she hasn't let go. And our new therapist says that she's got some tightness in her hamstrings and possible low muscle tone in her feet. And she said this is probably what is hindering her progress because the tightness in her legs is causing her to kind of hunch over to be more comfortable when she's standing. And she's not standing tall enough to support her balance. So, again, when we get this news, it just takes me back to day 70, hour 72, May 15th, and I replay everything about those brain bleeds in my head again. Just as soon as you feel like, oh, everything is smooth sailing, I'm back to being in the NICU, hearing that my baby's got grade 4 bilateral IVH. And it's the worst case possible. And I've talked to the therapist, and we're working on a plan for her. They want to get her in some good shoes to help her with her balance. And the therapist is still very, very positive. She thinks that Tally will get through this stage and be able to walk and move on to the next part of our journey. But it's just really hard to hear sometimes that any of your children, whether they be a preemie or a full term or a preteen, are struggling. You want to take it all on yourself as a parent and just take care of it for them when you can't. But we're going to get through the next stage of Tally, and she's going to be the rock star that she is. But I do say, any preemie out there, if they recommend it, you got to get them in any type of early prevention to help them. So we're fortunate enough with Mike's job that he has days off during the week where we can both continue to work and still make it to all of her appointments. And my job's pretty flexible, so if he can't make it, they're always willing to work with us also. But if push came to shove and one of us would have to do part-time or quit or something like that, we would have to do what we'd have to do to make sure Tally got the care that she needed. But I really think, of course, we don't know. We didn't have it with Miles to know if that would have helped him at all, but the therapy, I feel like, is just something that we can't compromise on and that she has to go to.
I feel like the best thing about the physical therapy has been having that external person to let us know where she is, where she should be. Not even that so much, really, but just to give us an evaluation of what she's doing, what she needs to work on, and to help us she does 90% of her fit therapy work at home with us. But the therapist can say, this is what you need to work on. This is what you need to do. This is how you need to work on her. Plus, we can see the therapist working with her and see what they're trying to get her to do. And we have a plan. Where with Miles, maybe therapy would have helped him some. I don't know. But we didn't have that external gauge, I guess, that measurement to say, well, this is what is holding him back, and this is what you could do to fix that. We didn't have that with him. Maybe it would have helped. I don't know, but
Well, Miles with him, I was like on the verge of getting him some type of speech therapy because he wasn't talking when the books say they should talk or the internet says they should talk. But no joke, one session with this speech therapist, and then he started spouting off words like he knew what he was doing the whole time, which he probably did know what he's doing the whole time. He's clever sometimes. But even if you can't, like, we're fortunate enough to where we have our private insurance who will cover Tally's private therapy, and we also still do what's called Sooner Start in Oklahoma, which is free through the state because of Tally's low birth weight and early birth.
yeah, it's
So
it's basically like a Medicaid program.
yeah, so if you can't afford private therapies, most states have some type of program that you could get into that would be free of cost. With a Sooner Start, we only see her once a month, and sometimes it's virtual, sometimes it's in home, but that's fine with us because we have our private therapy. But they give more options. If your baby needs more than once a month appointments, they will get you the appointments that you need and they will help you. The Sooner Start through the state, we were encouraged to continue to do that along with our private therapies because they will also help us when Tally is school age if she needs any type of help in the school systems. So I definitely would recommend if your state has some type of help. It's not income based, it's based on your child's needs because we don't qualify for any type of income based systems. But this isn't based on that. This is based on the children and what they need. So if you haven't looked into that and you have a child that needs early intervention, I would definitely look into what your state offers.
And if they haven't, like in the NICU, if they haven't gone over these types of resources, ask your pediatrician. They'll know.
Yeah, and if you're still in the NICU, they have social workers. So if you haven't met with a social worker, you can ask to meet with someone, or I'm sure they will at some point get with you. But again, remember, you're your child's advocate. So if they haven't mentioned the social worker to you, I would ask about them because obviously I had no idea that the NICU had social workers until we were in the situation.
Yeah, and we also had, gosh, what was that? The life coach, whatever her title was.
Her name was Lindsay.
Yeah, her name was Lindsay, but she was really helpful. She was really great, honestly, with helping us get acquainted with the NICU, with the hospital. She brought us books for Nevaeh and for Miles about having a preemie brother or sister in the hospital. She made Nevaeh that little necklace with Tally's footprints on it. She had that made for her. So she was very, very, very helpful.
Maybe she's like a child life specialist or something. I'm not sure what her
Yeah,
exact title
I,
was, and I'm sure every hospital has different names for their.
yeah,
But she was really, really nice. And our hospital once a week would provide like sack lunches for the parents, and they had nice little Father's Day events and Mother's Day events. And I think at least our NICU, which was OU Children's Hospital, they did the best to make your stay the best that it could be with the situation that you're in. So,
yeah. They had little cameras set up, so even if you couldn't be there at the time, you could get on the website and see your baby with this little camera pointed at he or her like 24 hours a day. Most of the family, except for us, that's the only way they got to meet her for the first 4 months was that little camera. But so you always had access to them. You could call the nurse 24 hours a day. They were always super happy to talk to you, even at 4 in the morning. If you saw something on the camera that looked weird, you could call them and say, "What's she doing? She doesn't look happy. What's going on?" And they would talk you down and tell you whatever you needed to know, and it was it was as good as it could be. I feel like I couldn't imagine what more they could have done except for maybe let more people in. But COVID, I get that.
Yeah, I mean, it was what it was. It was the hardest time with some glimpse of hope and inspiration and love and the miracle of God. But this by far has been the toughest part of my NICU journey with Tally because it's just the most unknown because there's nothing they can do to reverse any brain damage that she has or anything that we just have to wait and see. Like the when she had the ROP, which we'll talk about that at another time, they could have a use a laser to correct it. So every any other issue we ran into, there was a way to fix it. And this brain bleeds, there's no fixing. It's
It
just
was all
waiting to see.
it was all up to her.
Yeah.
How much is there going to be any damage? And like I said before, she's still developing those folds in her brain, so it comes down to how hard is she going to work to overcome any damage that was done. So someday we'll maybe have an indication, but right now, all we can say is she's progressing physically at her own pace. We try to remind ourselves that progress is progress, whether it's as much as we think it should be or want it to be. But she's still moving forward, and that's what matters. Sometimes that's a really hard thing to accept, but that's what we have to tell ourselves. And outside of physically, she's talking so much faster than her brother or her sister did. Just this morning, she said breakfast. She said so big as I picked her up out of her crib this morning. And she got hold of her remote control, pointed it at the TV, and said Bluey. So she's amazing. She does the work. She's blessed and she works hard. And I don't know that there's a better combination that anybody could have.
She's got a great support system with our family and friends and everyone who cheers her on, and we're always open for any extra prayers. We've got her on the prayer list at church, and we've got her on the prayer list of all of our family and friends, and she is a fighter, and she's got more strength than I think I'm ever going to have in her pinky that I have in my whole body. So,
Everybody in the NICU says that preemies are the toughest kids that you'll ever meet, and I believe it. So I've met people since this started who were preemies themselves or had preemies, and they'll be the first to tell you, yeah, they're the strongest people you'll ever meet. So extra prayers are always welcome. If you need extra prayers, let us know.
yes.
We've got plenty to go around. Uh, is there anything you wanted to add, Stephanie, to wrap it up?
No, I mean, anybody who gets the news that your baby's sick in any way, shape, or form, whether it be a cold or RSV or grade 4 brain bleeds, it's hard. I have learned that being a parent is probably the hardest job you're ever going to have. So Just make sure you're there for your babies and your kids as they get older and be their advocates. Make sure they get what they need because even in the doctors, they have the best intentions. They also have 500 other kids that need their attention. So just make sure you're always there for your babies. Look for signs.
Definitely. You know your baby better than anybody. Sometimes even the parents disagree, but you're the one that's going to know if something's wrong. You're going to see it. Something needs to be adjusted. You're going to see it. So never be afraid to speak up. Never be afraid to ask for help. Never be afraid to reach out and ask questions and find out what's going on, because somebody can tell you, and it's up to you to figure it out. And with enough hard work, your baby's going to make it. You just have to hang in there and try and keep your head on straight, because it'll mess with you for sure. And that's fine. It's supposed to. It's not easy.
September is NICU Awareness Month. September 30th is Wear Green. So if you want to wear green to support the NICUs.
Yes. And I want to throw this out too. I don't know, maybe not everybody knows this, but our hospital had volunteers who came in to hold the baby, like the NICU babies, whose parents couldn't be there, which is right. It's so important for them to have that, that physical contact. And some parents just can't be there as much as others. So they had volunteers who would just go room to room and sit down and hold the babies. So if you ever feel like you need to give some time and try and help out, check with your local hospital. A lot of them do things like that, volunteer programs. So if you just feel like you want to go into the hospital and hold babies, it's important. So you can always find out if your hospitals do that. So I think that's going to be it for today. I think.
Thanks
So,
for listening to me. I might have got a little teary-eyed, but this is a hard subject to talk about. But if you have any questions, if you're going through anything about IVH or brain bleeds, and I'm not an expert, but we'd be happy to help you or maybe help finding the answers or resources that you might need.
yeah, it's definitely hard. It's still hard. So anything you need, let us know. If you have any questions, any comments, stories you want to share, feel free to reach out. Uh, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're listening, just make sure that you have subscribed so you get the new episodes as soon as they come out. So until next time, probably 2 weeks. Uh, Thanks for joining us, Team Tally, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.